All right, Kathy Smith, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm really good.
I'm super excited to have you on. And we have so much to talk about. And, obviously, you live here in Utah. I live here in Utah. And we still haven't met in person yet. So this is the closest we've gotten so far. But we'll get there.
Exactly. Let me shake your hand. No, I can't wait to go hiking one of these days, though. Yes, for sure.
Yes, we will. So here's the thing. I think most of my audience knows you, but I kind of want to start from your journey from the beginning. Like, how do you got into the fitness industry? Because I think a lot of people don't know that. They just know you as Kathy Smith, the fitness model, the fitness person. But let's I want to talk about, who you were as a kid. What were your passions growing up that led you down the path of where you are today?
Okay, great question. So, I was raised in the military. I think we start there because, and most people don't quite understand that really defines you as a person, because every 2 to 3 years you're having to move. So it's not like you're with the same friends. Every 2 to 3 years I'm either in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Hawaii, San Angelo, Texas, Mobile, Alabama, San Diego. You're just Illinois, Wisconsin, and there's a thing that happens to military kids. And one of the things that happens is that you either learn how to put your hand out and make a friend, or you get very introverted. So I became one of those, okay, let's make a friend and let's get connected. But I have to say that a big turning point in my life, and this is where the real story of my career begins. And when I was 17 years old, so I was in Belleville, Illinois. My dad was 42. He was an Air Force pilot. And I get a call at school 3 days before my high school graduation. And the call was, you need to get to the hospital. And I got to the hospital. By the time I got there, my dad had passed away of a massive heart attack. And so it was just one of those things that devastated me, because I looked like my dad. They called me, his name was Carl. They called me Little Carly. And so it just devastated my life. But then a year and a half later, my mom and my stepdad were in a plane, and they were flying from St. Louis to Wisconsin. And it was wintertime, and the plane iced up and it went down in a farmer's field. And so my mom and stepdad were killed. And it was just, and at that point I was in Hawaii. I was in college in Hawaii, and I got the call, and I just sank down in the chair, and I just put my hands into my head into my hands, and it was bawling and crying and thinking, what am I going to do with my life, and how am I going to make it through all this? And as life has a way of opening doors when you need them, I had a boyfriend at the time. He was a football player, and I wasn't athletic. I wasn't. I need to tell another part of the story we need to get back to, because this is an important part of the story also. But I would just go to the track with him, and not because I was a runner or anything, but I just didn't want to be alone. I was afraid to be alone. So I would go to the track, and we would run. He'd be running, and I'd run a lap, and then I would rest, and then I would run another lap. And pretty soon I started linking those laps together. And eventually I started running longer distances. But what happened was, when I got to about the 4-mile mark, I would come back from these runs, and I would notice that everything started feeling a little lighter. I was less, I felt like I was going to be able to make it, that I knew that I could find an answer. The depression was lifting, the anxiety was lifting, and I was able to focus more at school and college and study. And I back then started to make this connection between what you do with your body and how it affects your mindset. Now, to put this in context, I graduated high school in 1969. I was in college. Everything that we're talking about happened in the early 70s. So if you think about what's happening in America, and for your lot of guests, they weren't maybe born then, or they were so young to remember, but I'll take you back there, because there's a saying that if you haven't lived through the 70s, you haven't lived. But so it was civil rights, women's rights, Woodstock, the English invasion with, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the whole thing about music. sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, it was just all was happening here. It was the whole revolution in this country. We were sending men into space for the first time. It was just college campuses were erupting with all kinds of political movements because people were very much into equality for all. Especially for blacks and women. And so I was involved in all these movements, and I found that here was a time that most people were running to get away from their parents to go live life. And I was sitting here orphaned and not knowing what I was going to do with my life. And my only solace, my only thing that I did every single day, no matter what, was I laced up those tennis shoes. I got out the door and I ran. And eventually in 1975, I ran my first marathon.
Wow.
So, and the reason why, then getting back to this thing about time period, because when I ran my first marathon in Hawaii in 1975, the Honolulu Marathon, there was about 800. The field was about 800. It's now tens of thousands, but like 800. But the most important part of the story is that there was only about 3% of the field were women. So out of the 800, there might have been 15 women. And the reason why that is so important, because to this day, people always go, did you know you want to be a personal trainer? Did you know? And I'd have to go, honey, there wasn't such a thing. There were no certification programs. There was no this, it wasn't that connection. And we hadn't really even made the connection of, neurotransmitters and everything, the dopamine and the serotonin and the endorphins that get released when you exercise. Back then, I was fortunate enough because there was a doctor in Hawaii, and his name was Dr. Jack Scaff. And he was right around the time of another very famous doctor. His name was Dr. Cooper. Now, Dr. Ken Cooper coined the term aerobics. He was the first doctor ever to use the term aerobics. He's got the Cooper Institute in Texas, and he started doing all the testing on aerobics. So when I first started running, and you really have to get this, doctors would say, do not run. If you're a woman, don't run. You won't be able to have children. Your uterus is going to drop. Your boobs are going to drop. You're going to be. It's very, very unhealthy for you, and you're up against. So I was kind of just I knew they were wrong because I would sit there. I go, nothing that feels this good could be bad for you. I knew running saved my life. So and then I found this other doctor in Hawaii that was taking 56 heart patients. By the way, you can cut me off whenever you want.
No, keep going. This is so good.
Okay.
Good.
So there were 56 heart patients that he was taking. They would gather at Kapiolani Park, and when I say heart patients, these folks, mainly men, I think it was all men, had heart attacks. And he was going to prove, and his idea was to prove how important exercise is, because they took these 56 heart patients and trained them for the marathon. So I would show up in Kapiolani Park. I would listen to his lectures on nutrition. I would listen to his talks on running, and then we would start running. And eventually we would get in buses, and they would drop us out. In different places on the island, and we'd have to run back to Waikiki Beach. But what I learned along the way with all of this is that, again, for heart patients, they were saying, if you have a heart condition, don't move too much, don't have sex, don't walk up a flight of stairs. And the whole idea was the heart, you had to protect it. It's not like this muscle we had to strengthen. So that was my introduction to cardio. But interestingly enough, and what I feel very blessed about in this 4 year period I'm talking about, I have the boyfriend that I mentioned. His name was Rocky. I have Rocky, and Rocky would go into the gym and with the football team, and they were just launching a type of fitness equipment called Nautilus. And Nautilus with Arthur Jones, and Arthur developed Nautilus, and these were the prototypes, and it was in a Quonset hut, and I would be with all of the jocks in there, and again all the men. But I started back in 1973, 74 with this bicep curl. And, it was the whole Nautilus was based on a cam system that wherever the weakest point of your muscle is, the machine helped you through the weakest point so you could lift more weight. And anyway, I started right then getting like fixated, like, wow, this weight. I think, honestly, I like being around the guys, too. So that helped. But I really loved, once again, what it did to my mind. And what I started noticing, cardio does one thing, strength training did another thing. It was and for any woman out there, which I know most of you women watching are into it already, but strength training is powerful for empowering you. I mean, there's something about, there's one thing to be able to run, but there's nothing about feeling very strong and powerful that you take into your everyday life with your relationships and everything else. And even like with the Me Too movement, I mean, just being able to stand up for what you believe in. A lot of that I would start in the gym for me because I just felt like, wow, I felt strong. So anyway, and then the triangle is complete because at the same time, I was very fortunate that I started yoga. And the yoga, there was somebody at the University of Hawaii who was teaching a yoga class. And I don't know if you've heard of this name, but there was Paul Bragg. And Paul Bragg is Bragg amino acids. If you go to the health food store, if you buy your apple cider vinegar or your amino acids, it says Bragg at the top. Well, Paul Bragg was 92. He was kind of another granddaddy at the time of the health food movement. And he would teach a class on Waikiki Beach, and it was kind of like a stretch thing. And then I started yoga classes, and it was very much that mind, body, spirit that we started with the yoga. And it was not just the flexibility part of it, but I went to a class that was very much about being present, giving. Like you couldn't get into class unless you went and swept the floors. You had to, it was a community. You had to, make sure that you were on time and that you were sensitive to other people's needs around you. And all those teachings early on, I mean, just launched me. Okay, I'll stop about Hawaii. 1975, I get to LA, and the way I got to LA, I paid for part of my college education through doing bit parts on Hawaii Five-0 and a little parts of movies and things. And so a producer came to me and said, "Would you like to come to LA?" And I, being raised military, as I mentioned, I hadn't been in the big cities before. So here I come from military bases, whatever. Now I find myself in, wow, LA. And I was a little overwhelmed, but excited. I'm 25, 26, 27 years old, something like that, 25-ish, I guess. And I started, but then LA had horrible, horrible air quality. So, and I know you know about this because Salt Lake doesn't have great air quality, by the way. But back then, I mean, LA's cleaned up their act, but I came from this pristine running conditions in Hawaii. Now I'm in LA and I can hardly breathe. And so I started looking around if there was anything to do. And it just so happens that a woman who was launching an activewear line had asked me to be a model for her hang tags. And she said, she was teaching some classes in her garage. And then she had a place in Century City, which is next to Beverly Hills. She said, "Come to my class." And I went to the class. And so Barbara Streisand's on this side, Jane Fonda's on this side. And the class was like arm circles. So we started with, okay, so give me 8 more, 7, and I don't know if you can see with my
arms. I can see.
Yeah, so we go da 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 da, and we're not bouncing up and down. We did shoulder. Your shoulders would start burning because you did it like 8 minutes where you're just like, and now arms are up and down and up and down. And anyway, so but there was absolutely no aerobic component to it. But I love the class format. I loved the fact that we were coming together and inspiring one another, but there was no aerobic component. So I took my love of aerobics, which I got from my running. I took my love of music. I always loved to dance, and I put those together, and I put them together in a class format, started teaching, and, just like certain things like you talked about, when we've talked before, you talked about how, the stars aligned as you did something when you did your Fit2Fat2Fit. And then people started coming to the class. They started saying, okay, we need to do something. Now, the difference being something back then, because now we're talking 1978. So there's not enough. People say, well, did you start doing videos? No, there weren't enough VCRs in the marketplace. The first product I did was an exercise album. And so you would have an album and you would put it on a turntable, and then on the wall you would have a poster of me with pictures, and you'd hear my voice to music, and I'd be saying, okay, it's time to warm it up. Okay, give me 4 more. Okay, let's touch your toes, round it up, one vertebrae at a time. Anyway, you would listen to my voice, listen to the music. That went into video, which went into, so I was the first person ever to do an exercise DVD, CD-ROM. I sold over 20 million DVDs. My first DVDs hit and it got me on all the talk shows. I got my own TV show on USA Network. It was a daily show. I got, articles and became a correspondent for the Today Show, as well as, weekly LA Times contributor every single week. And then since that time, I've had 10 books, 3 of them New York Times bestsellers. I've had over 100 DVDs and product lines, QVC infomercials. And through the years, I've done over $500 million in Kathy Smith products.
Wow. That is so amazing, Kathy. That's such a good story. I could have listened to you for another 30 minutes. So I know you had to shorten that because there's so many valuable pieces in there. I kind of want to bring it back to the beginning and talk about this because it seemed like exercise for you became your therapy, right? Were you working with someone to help you overcome, your parents' deaths, or was it just the running that helped you through that?
Well, in the beginning, it was just the running. And then I started working with some people in Los Angeles, different people. But I was working in Hawaii with people, but not one-on-one. It was more workshopping. Okay. So there was things, but again, there was things like primal therapy where you would go in to rooms and, just kind of, they had, I want to make sure I say this so I don't sound like I'm crazy, but, you had things and you just be, you feel the feeling, they'd get you into the feeling, and then it's just like trying to get the anger out. Or then you did things where you would get very, very quiet and you just try to talk to, like I remember for years, it was when I was on a therapist's couch, it was talking to my dad and just saying, why did you leave me? Because it's that abandonment. It's things that rationally don't make sense. But that feeling of abandonment, that there you are, and now you're 17 years old, and you just left. You didn't even say goodbye. Mm-hmm. You didn't even, and you left. And again, an adult mind can say, well, yeah, he had a heart attack. But, when you're 17, it's just like, no, he's gone, and I didn't get to say goodbye, and I don't have anybody, and I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, and I'm afraid. And that afraid side comes up sometimes when you notice that sometimes you try to act too strong or too aggressive or too powerful. And really underneath all that, it's just like, oh, I'm so afraid. I'm just so afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to be found out. Like as you go through your career, and I think even in the career path, I think there's an arc to all of these careers. You're at one stage of it. But even with the Kate Spades committing suicide or those kind of things that it's almost like in the beginning, the first stuff is the easiest because it kind of happens and you're like, oh my God, this is fun. Yeah. But there's no pressure at that point. And then a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years into it, what are you going to do next? How did that one do? Where are you going? Are you still relevant? And, the growth pattern for all of us, just like we have talked about for acceptance and non-judgment about your body and where you are in the health cycle of your life, and if you have weight or no weight, there's a place where there's a gentleness and a calmness and an acceptance of where you are in the arc of your life. And sometimes the way that people are judging you, and if the judgment is only on how much money you're making, how many Instagram followers you have, how much how many TV shows you've been on, and once you can click those off, and I think this is what we all find. I know you've gone through it, I've gone through it, but once you can click those off, okay, I've been on the Today Show, I've been on The View, I've been on the Oprah Show, I've been on this, I've been on that. Okay, you have all that, but right here, right now, that doesn't really make a difference. At this, right here, right now, it's what am I doing today? How am I waking up today? What is my contribution to my family, to myself? And how do I find resiliency as well as just joy and happiness with just this?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that at the end because I have a question for you that I ask everybody else about fulfillment. But before I do that, the reason I asked about the therapy thing is, do you still see exercise for you today as a form of therapy, or has it become something different for you now that you're fast forward X amount of years to where we are today? What is exercise to you now?
Well, what is it to now? It's a yes and no question. Mm-hmm. Yes, I love movement, but I
Yeah.
love, but not, the funny thing is, I love movement, probably not in necessarily the traditional sense that people are thinking about. Like I'll go to a gym, and every gym I go to, I'm going to Europe for 6 weeks, leaving next week. And every gym I say, you can give me any gym, the crappiest gym at some hotel somewhere that has four pieces of equipment there. And I delight in walking and going, okay, what can I do with this? And I don't need the best of the best, but if you give me the best of the best, it's like, how can I use it differently? But for me, I feel, and I have visions of this. By the way, if you go to the Natural History Museum, they have a show right now, and part of the show is on cheetahs. And I remember when I used to run, I used to channel, like I used to always feel like, oh my God, this must be what it feels like to go across the plains of Africa, because I would be running, and sometimes I would be so depressed at night that I would get out, I would put my shoes on, it would be a full moon, and I would just go for a 5 mile run, and I would just feel the heaviness lifting. So I don't have that heaviness anymore. I through all my work, I don't have that. But here's what I do have. I feel that with I've always been a person with a lot of thoughts. I've always been a person with a lot of ideas. I'm an entrepreneur. I built a business. I ran my business. I love all that. And I think what can happen with my type of brain is it can go all over the place. I can have 400 thoughts in the time that I'm talking to you right now. And I think with the exercise and that whole process of my routine in the morning, whether it's exercise or it's just my morning ritual, gets me into focus. And I think that's where I find most joy is when I get focused. I like to let my brain go because it's very exciting into all these areas. But at one point, I need to bring it back. And this is what I'm going to accomplish today. And I like that focus. And then I honestly just like the way that exercise feels in different parts of my body. So I've been involved with self-awareness work for 40 years now. So you can imagine, and I know you have your shirt off, but I mean, for me, so I'm looking at your muscles, but like what bodybuilders go through. But the non-bodybuilders, like the people that like myself aren't bodybuilders, but all of a sudden I'll find something where I go, oh my God, look at that. If I pull that back, that down, oh, I get it here. Oh, listen, I didn't feel that. And I just love that feeling because I
Yeah.
like activating new muscles. I like activating. So I find that fun and fascinating too. So that's what keeps me going back.
Yeah, it's that level of self awareness and that mind muscle connection that you've had to figure out. There were no podcasts that you could listen to learn this stuff. It was kind of like self taught in a way, and it's really cool to hear your story because we live in a day and age where there's CrossFit gyms and there's cycling classes and there's Zumba and there's like a million things out there versus before when you got started there was hardly anything and there was no certifications like you talked about. There was no access to this information unless you went and studied it or you just kind of figured it out on your own, which it sounds like you did an awesome job of. The question I have for you next is, how has the fitness industry changed over the years, and how have you been able to adapt over the years from everything 10 years from now, everything that we see now probably will be totally different. But how have you been able to adapt over the years?
Well, first of all, I've always been fascinated in technology. I started with technology back in 1971, when I was at Southern Illinois University, and I was in a computer science class, which back in those days, if you're in computer science class, and just to put in perspective, this is still when Gates and Jobs and people, we had to go into these big rooms and you with Fortran and Cobalt and do programming. And I love that kind of stuff. So I mean, I was always fascinated with technology. So through my career, it's been the merging of technology with fitness. So if you think about it, it was album, then VCR, then DVDs, then CD-ROMs, and then we went into interactive, and then now I have downloadable app. I have an app and downloadable workouts. And one of the reasons, like even with Jeff Hayes, who is a mutual friend of ours, he was the reason why I came to Utah, and the reason why because started a company called NextFit, and NextFit was downloadable workouts on your mobile devices. So all that, like how you deliver information has always been fascinating to me. And how do you motivate people? So why your story resonates so much for me, because after about 15 years business that I was in the business after 15 years, I go, oh my God, I cannot get up on stage again and tell people that they need to work out and eat right. You know, that, I mean, it's just like if people don't know and then after 20 years, it's like they know that they know this. And so I changed my speech, when I would go to speaking engagements for a while, I would get up on stage. I'd literally walk out on stage and, kind of in a very confident fashion. And I would just put my arms and go, okay, so what's your excuse? You know everything I'm going to tell you right now. You pretty much know because, but especially back, 20 years ago, let's say. I mean, we were just getting into encouraging people to work out and lift weights and all these things. We weren't getting into all of the the minor details that we are now, like how much saturated fat. I mean, I take that back. That was a little bit of I misspoke a little bit. But in general, the big thing is, especially, I mean, for about 10 years, I had to encourage women to lift weights. Everybody still thought 10 years into it that you were going to get too bulky, you're going to get too, and so the message was, you need to do this, but why aren't you doing it? And to your point, and so then I would go through and I'd say, okay, I'm going to give a free book out to anybody who can give me an excuse I haven't heard before. But today what we're going to do is we're going to let's hear your excuses. And it's not enough time, and I don't enjoy it, and I got a hurt knee, and it's boring. But then you really, in listening to my audience, just like you did with your program, you find that people have some amazing lives that sometimes just get very complicated, and they're going through divorces, and they have aging parents, and that has Alzheimer's, and they just don't have the time. So that was where I felt very, very much, if I can find ways to bring this to their home, if I can find ways to solve your problem, to help you do it on that chair, at the office, in your home, not have to get to the gym. And that's where my brand exploded. It was when women started getting pregnant. They had their children. They couldn't get out to the gyms. They wanted because of the love connection and the bond with their babies. They didn't want to leave their babies. And then we started bonding, and we didn't have at that point the social media that we do now, but we would communicate like at a TV show, and we had a contest, and we had 100,000 letters that came into this contest. Wow. But it's just like every morning I get up and I watch you. You're my morning, because I would teach an exercise segment every morning on TV, and then we would get into our nutrition and everything else. But you just had people that were, I'm at home, I don't know what to do, I'm going to do my whatever with Kathy, and they just to that point became you're a friend, a confidant, sharing their stories. And I think the biggest thing for me was people started sharing their stories of empowerment, and the women did. And I know you've heard this through the years, but women, once they discover their bodies and how they can, and when I say that, they discover how their bodies can serve them to just be powerful and confident and all that, then their relationship with their husbands, their work environment, everything starts changing. And those women would come up to me and start crying and saying, Kathy, I didn't realize your exercise class would change my life the way it did. So I think you get those stories, I get those stories, and that's what fueled us and kept fueling us. But for me, it's I've always been a seeker. I've always been curious, and I've always been able to put myself into situations that where there's a lot of hotshots around. I like being around the hotshots, people that are doing it, and I don't feel competitive. I don't feel lesser than. I don't feel more than. I don't feel whatever. I love to learn, and I think that that has drawn a lot of people into my life, so that I get to continue this path, whether it's having a wonderful podcast with you to, we talked about some people on today before we got on, but just continue to build business, write books as it's relevant to my age group. Because as much as you see what you're going through, I'm so excited to see what you're going to be going through. The more you turn into the, you start speaking to the aging aspect of this, because so much of it's still focused in your 30s and your 40s is still focused on how great am I going to look. But at one point, it's how great am I going to feel.
That's a good point.
And how great am I going to feel? And are the things that I'm doing to look good also the things I'm doing to make me feel good for a long time? Because that's where there might be a little disconnect here, and people aren't realizing that what you do to get you losing a lot of weight, or get you in shape, and for this 5-year is a 5-year process, is that going to be the thing that's going to help your longevity? And we've discussed this before, which you're very much into, which I really am. Follow your podcast, and so grateful that you talk so much about it. But what's happening on the inside of all this, so that we know that what we're doing is really healthy for us and not just a vanity play. And there's nothing wrong with vanity. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like trying to say that we don't all look in the mirror and stuff. But at the end, but every year you pass a certain age, and it's not as old as people think, by the way. But every year you pass a certain age, it's like, man, I want to be on this planet for a long time. So I want to make sure I'm doing things that, and not just on the planet. I just finished last week running a half marathon with my daughter in New York. And that whole thing, you know how much fun it is to be, I am 66 years old right now. And my daughter is, I have a 29-year-old, by the way, that is a Olympian, went to the Olympics in Rio.
Wow.
And we can talk about that in a second because of what I've learned from her. But then my youngest daughter, who's turning who's 26 right now, and I ran with her in New York. But that's the type of stuff that what you're doing right now, what you're helping people do, is so that, I mean, for you 30 years from now, that you can be, and having this kind of heading to Europe, just climb Kilimanjaro, doing these things that are exciting parts of an exciting time in my life. And so life is only for me getting better, as opposed to, you see so much where it's like, okay, I can look good till I'm going to make sure my abs look great till I'm, 45, and then it's a downhill slide. So it is more exciting than ever because of all of the new research we have on. And I just want to maybe touch on two really quickly things that have just come out recently. Because with my my weekly podcast, I'm always bringing people on what's the latest in aging. So some of the stuff that we kind of think about my early career, which was a lot of this aerobic dancing. And when I say aerobic dancing, they're just mainly, we were still doing jump squats and everything, but it might be a step together, step, touch, jump squat. And it still was very vigorous. But one of the things they're finding now, and I just interviewed Dr. Amen on this, on brain health, is that coordination moves are so important for brain health. And so just doing strict running and strict, motions that are, that require no coordination don't really stimulate that. Even some strength training, which is great for a lot of things, that you're not getting that coordination side. So for aging, coordination moves are really important for brain function and balance. And then, another really great one is, as we age, the first muscles to go are your super fast muscles. So you have fast twitch and slow twitch, but the super fast twitch muscles are the first to go. And so this is true of a lot of people, but especially women, they're not training really propulsion and training things that are really, explosive. And so those are things that I find, those are like just little nuggets that I like to pass along all the time, because with the idea, like I was at the gym yesterday and I'm jumping up on fairly high, because I can jump up fairly high. And I had a couple guys come up, they go, oh my God. And it's just something that I train because it's something that goes. And if you don't do any kind of that sort of training, if you're just really doing, I always do this because I always think of weight training, like a lot of people think weight training is a bicep curl or something. And I know you don't, obviously, yeah. But I'm saying for, and I through the years have always liked these different modalities. And I think that keeps you very well-rounded.
Yeah, that's great advice, and especially for a lot of women, because you were lifting weights in the days back before women, even knew it was important to lift weights, thinking, oh, I'm going to get big and bulky. Even today in 2018, there's still women that think that, like, if I lift weights, I'm going to get bulky. And here we are, 40 years later from when you started lifting weights, and now, some women are coming around to it. But I'm glad that you're a proponent of these things like, box jumps and, those fast twitch muscles that a lot of women just don't focus on. And we get static in our day-to-day routine sometimes. So you give us some great advice. I kind of want to shift gears and talk a little bit about how your nutrition has changed over the years, right? With new research coming out about nutrition, how has that led you down? Because we talked about this on your podcast, to find what's optimal for you today. Like, how is your nutrition over the years from research or like people in the industry talking about, oh, this is the hot thing, low fat or whatever? How have you navigated those waters to find out what's optimal for you?
Yeah, really
From a nutritional perspective.
Right, really good question. And so even back in the days when we were back in Hawaii, I happened to be right at a college, dated a doctor, and he was a emergency room doctor, and he was very much into nutrition.
Was this after Rocky? Or was this before Rocky?
It was after Rocky.
Okay, gotcha.
From football player to doctor.
There you go.
And so, there was a book at the time that was the bestseller, and it was called Mega Vitamin Therapy. And it was really the beginning of, what can vitamin C do? What are the different vitamins, vitamin B? And so Princeton, the university had a division, and it was called the Brain Bio Institute. So we went back there because we were very focused on what do these chemicals do to the brain? Chemicals being ingesting vitamins and such. And they were doing some research on mega vitamin therapy for people with depression and especially schizophrenia. So all of stuff was from the very beginning was very fascinating for me. But one of the things that I had an acute awareness early on, and this is a blessing and a curse, I saw that what I put in my body, I would react to. So I could be out to dinner. And again, I'm like 24 years old, and I have a glass of wine and some cheese, some red wine and some cheese and something else. And I could feel like something happening in my body. And I could feel my brain start to go like, wow, I can't focus as well right now. What's going on? Or I would feel all of a sudden I would just feel very emotional. And back then you're not connecting the dots, but I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm having a feeling about my dad and my mom and the whole thing. But eventually, I started connecting the dots of like what you're putting in your body is affecting your moods and your mindset. So I started to do slight refinements at that point, but not much. It was just very much what I love to eat, which I happen to love. I was raised military, but my family was from Wisconsin. We come from farmers. We come from people that when I would go back in the summers, we would plant gardens. We would have cows that we would milk. We would, my auntie would go back and kill a chicken and then bring it in and cook it for dinner. So it was very much farm life. And in farm life, as you can imagine, you're eating a very a healthy diet in the sense that it's fresh food. You go and pick it, you eat it. The meat you're eating is, it's right there and you're killing it right then and eating it. And you're not having a lot. If you're baking bread, you're making bread, you're baking the bread and everything. So I came from that. And then traveling, obviously, the fast food. I must say, my mom, I will go back and say that I was a Twinkie and a Hostess Twinkie lover. And every day after school, I would have Hostess Twinkies when I was I know. I was very much love that sort of thing. But I seemed to burn it. It didn't seem to be a huge problem at the time because I burned it, and But to answer your question, I know I'm beating around the bush. I think because the reason why I'm beating around the bush is because I'm thinking about all the stages we've gone through, and we go to, and let me just jump in now. I think I got my focus. So fat, all of a sudden fat became a bad word, and everything was low fat. And then we switched over, and as you know, we switched over to carbohydrates, and it was low fat but full of sugar, and that was probably what propelled biggest thing that propelled our obesity epidemic. I did not fall into it, but what I'm not, and the reason why I'm sort of hesitating, I'm thinking it was there. I wish I could cut this part of the interview out because I'm teasing, but that's actually good for me to think about. And the reason why is because, yes, there were these camps. Okay, now there were these camps because I remember writing a book about this. Mm-hmm. There's these camps, and you had the Pritikin and the Dean Ornish and that whole thing, which is very low fat. And there's a whole science that came out about if you want to reverse heart disease, you have to go very low fat, but they were also low sugar and everything. Mm-hmm. And so we had a Pritikin Center in Santa Monica, which I went down to all the time, and they had a restaurant there, and I would eat there. But it was all about cutting back fat fats and everything. And it was very hard to stick to, but they were showing how they were reversing heart disease with this low fat and low sugar carbohydrate approach. Then you had, your low fat, which was being replaced with sugars, and that boom took over. And we really hadn't gotten into the high fat craze at that time. It was just really more of or what started with the 30-30-30, which was the balance bar type things, where we started moving a little bit more toward more fat. But in general, fat became a bad word. So I have to say I was probably in that camp where you heard so much about saturated fats, and saturated fats were so bad for you. So as the pendulum started swinging back, it was a little hard to understand if people were really coming at it from they're just trying to sell a product, or if it was really science. And you could read science on both sides. Some science was saying, too much fat's bad. The other science is saying such and such, that fat, you can, like with Atkins and whatever, you can change your blood work. And there was a very confusing time. I think we're coming out of this. I think thanks to you and some of your messaging about go and see if it's working or not. Find out, test your blood work, see if it's working right away. I think that is powerful messaging. But, what am I doing today? I have always been my own guinea pig. I don't mind saying that. I like to try things, and I like to see how it works. And I can tell you pretty quickly, because if I find myself getting constipated, I can't sleep, because my baseline is I feel good, I'm in shape, I have no bloat, whatever. So if I start there and I say, okay, I'm going to try a new diet. Oh my God, I haven't gone to the bathroom in 3 days. That doesn't seem weird. Oh my God, I'm so amped up. I'm in bed and I can't turn my mind off. Wow. I mean, I wonder what that's all about. Maybe, I don't have enough carbohydrate. I mean, I've been eating my, and then last but not least, oh my God, I went and looked at my blood work and my cholesterol levels are going up. So I started to refine around, okay, I needed enough protein. I need enough vegetables. I need enough, good complex carbohydrates in my diet. And depending on what I'm doing, if I'm hiking for 4 days, one day, I go a little bit more complex carbohydrates. I have tried more saturated fats. It does not work for me. I like fat. I get my fats from avocados and nuts and olive oils. And I love to make smoothies, and I like my greens, and I like putting my coconut oils and stuff in my smoothies, although I also go to my fish oils, actually more so than my coconut oils now. But in general, I like to have I feel better when I have more oil in my diet. I feel better when I eat more fish-based protein. Yeah. I'm not eating, I would say, very, very, very little meat. I mean, if you invite me over, I would have a little bit, but it's really fish-based. I love sardines. I love to have, I love clean food. I love feeling that when I get done with my meal that I have a lot of energy and I can still get up and do a podcast or go out and I don't want to feel sluggish. I'm not eating, even when it's gluten-free, I don't eat a lot of processed foods, and only really do it when I travel. I try to eat, I try to have gaps between my eating. I try to stop my eating. I can't stop as early as people talk about, because I sleep better if I stop my eating around 8 o'clock at night, and then I eat again like about 11 o'clock the next day or something like that. I've read research on between men and women, the differences between intermittent fasting, what's good for men. I think one thing that I'm noticing more and more, I just had Sarah Gottfried, who wrote The Hormone Cure and other things up here. And one thing she emphasized is that men and women are different, thank God. And, everything that's good for a man, like what's good for you and your body I have a very lean body, and I find that if I really start to lose muscle mass and energy and stuff, if I go too much, too long, too many days with some of the things we're talking about. I've done it, and I just start to notice a little bit of, more of an atrophy that I notice that I can't maintain. So I think to your point of what's going on, knowing your blood work and what's going on the inside, I mean, I look at things, I go, oh my God, this is happening. It's not so good for me. I noticed that if I do 16 hours of fasting occasionally, but on a regular basis, I can get very, very lean. And I don't
Yeah.
like that, especially the older you get, that very lean look is not healthy. And I don't feel good like with that.
Yeah.
So I adjust accordingly. So I take the information in. I try to assess all sides, and I try to assess people that are telling me things. A lot of times, if they're not selling a product, I've always been. And listen, I sell products, so I'm not. I'm not against. I'm a marketer, so I'm not against it. But I think we have to be careful of where we're getting our information, and if somebody's got something they're trying to sell you, just make sure that you're looking and listening, and you also see if it's good for you, because maybe what you're doing for that gorgeous body of yours isn't exactly what I should be doing for me.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice for a lot of people to hear, rather than focusing just on your physical appearance, right? Is this diet helping me lose weight, or am I gaining weight on this diet? Maybe it's not for me. The only way to really know, like you said, is to really find out what's going on the inside. And that's overlooked, I think, in our society, because we're so focused on the outward appearance. I want to be skinny, I want to have a six-pack, and whatever it takes to get there. Sometimes people will sacrifice their health to look a certain way. And just because you have a six-pack, like I know people that do, these physique competitions that get really, really unhealthy, but they look good on stage, and we think that's the idea of what we're supposed to look like to be healthy, when in reality it's not the case. And so I'm glad that you talk about that. We're coming up on. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to quick that, because there's a saying that at a certain age a woman has to choose between her butt and her face. Well, the thing is, or your abs in your face or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you get down to that place where because I'm going to be on the cover of First for Women here in about 2 weeks. It's a magazine. It's got about 1.5 million circulation, and we shot it in a bikini, and it's going to be on the cover. And if so, for those abs to look good, you really have to like slim down. And then if I stay that low for any length of time, my face gets a little too lean. And so, anyway, maybe not, but a little side note.
Well, it's good for people to know that, or was seeing these magazines thinking, oh, Kathy looks so great, I want to look like her, I want to be healthy like her. You're kind of saying, look, that's not my ideal health weight, right? So I like that you're talking about that. One quick question that I want to get to, Kathy, is with all, you talked about, Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade and, those kinds of things, and even Robin Williams, of what's happening in society. Tony Robbins had a great quote, and he says, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And you've been very successful, especially from an outside perspective. A lot of us don't know you personally. We see all the success and think, oh, Kathy must be happy. But my question for you is, what in your life brings you that fulfillment, right? I think for most people realize it's not the money, it's not the fame. What is it in your life that brings you that fulfillment, that truly grounds you throughout all of this success you've had?
I have a strong relationship with I have a strong spiritual practice, and I, on a daily basis, the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is say my gratitude prayers and connect with nature. And it could be I step outside my back door, and I just feel the wind on my face and going against the leaves, and I listen for a few birds, and I could almost cry just thinking about it, because it's funny how the simplest thing, that just simple thing of just thank you, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the birds. Thank you for the amazing color of the leaves and the trees and the sounds. And am I blessed or what to have this? And everything's uphill from there. So it's not, it doesn't matter. It really, I've had big houses and small houses and in between houses, and I lived with Rocky where we had no house, and every stage has just been magnificent. And part of it is I've gotten knocked down a bunch of times, and I think when you get knocked down, whether it's losing parents, you have something that happens in business that doesn't go your way, you have something in a relationship that doesn't go your way, and you find that through all of it, there's a center here of just I have my thoughts, and I have the ability to help people every day. And anyway, not talking about fitness. I mean, I literally the other day was in New York, I don't even miss a beat. And I'm like with my daughter, and I don't even miss. A guy comes up to me and he goes, "Do you think?" He goes, "Do you go into Whole Foods? Do you think I could have some soup?" I go, and I just like literally go, "What kind of soup do you want?" And he says, he looks at me like, I go, "Okay, what do you?" Because I was kind of in a hurry. I go, "So, well, what do you want? Do you want a combination? Do you want an 18 or 16 ounce?" And I sort of like just take it, and I come out, and I'm going to the checkout. I get all my things. I come out, and I go, "You," and then he goes, "Do you think I could get a roll with that?" I go, "Yeah. Do you want whole wheat or sourdough?" And I come out, I hand it to him, and honestly, it just quickly in that moment made my day. And what does it take? It's just buying somebody a cup of soup or whatever. And you have the ability every single moment of your day to do that. And that brings me joy. And I do that all day long.
That is beautiful. And thank you so much for talking about that. I think practicing gratitude on a daily basis, no matter what you have, being grateful for what you have is the most important thing. It's not about having those things that bring you happiness, but being grateful for what you do have. And I do agree with you that everything in this life happens for a greater good. Even if it's a sucky, terrible, horrible thing like losing someone, it happens so that in the end it happens for us to grow. And in the moment, things like that suck. And me going through divorce was really hard for me. But those kinds of personal experiences that break you down are there to build you back up in the end. And so I think that's a good reminder for people that are going through hard times that, hey, this is happening for you to learn a lesson. So instead of life happening to you, look at life happening for you. And what can you learn from these experiences? So, Kathy, before we go really quick, where can people find you online, social media, websites, maybe all your DVDs? I don't know. You just tell us where to go so we can find and be in touch with you.
Yeah, if you just go to kathysmith.com, and that's Kathy with a K, kathysmith.com, all the other information's there. Instagram's Kathy Smith Fitness, but everything you can find at kathysmith.com. Everything is there.
Okay, Kathy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate what you do and admire you and respect you, and I'm looking forward to that hike.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Bye-bye.